Goodness was never meant to win Machiavelli's harsh reality. We are taught this early, before we understand power, before we understand people, before we understand the world. Be good, be honest, work hard, do the right thing, and everything will work out. This is the first story most of us are given, not as a suggestion, but as a rule of reality. Parents repeat it with love, teachers reinforce it with authority, religions sanctify it, movies romanticize it, history books quietly edit themselves around it. Good people win, bad people lose. Justice arrives eventually, and if it hasn't arrived yet, just wait. But something feels wrong, because at some point, often painfully, reality interrupts the story. The honest employee is passed over. The whistleblower is punished. The kind person is exploited. The truth teller is silenced. And the ones who bend the rules, they rise. At first, we treat these moments as exceptions, unfortunate accidents, temporary injustices. We tell ourselves the system is broken, but fixable, that goodness still wins in the long run. But then it keeps happening, again and again, and again, and slowly a quiet question forms, one we're often afraid to say out loud. If goodness wins, why does it feel like it keeps losing? This is not cynicism. This is recognition. The discomfort you feel is not moral weakness. It is cognitive dissonance, a clash between what you were promised and what you are observing. Because when you step back and look honestly at history, not the sanitized version, but the real one, a different pattern emerges. Empires were not built by kindness. Revolutions were not won by moral purity. Institutions were not shaped by honesty alone. They were shaped by strategy, by force, by narrative control, by those willing to operate in spaces others refused to enter. And yet, after the dust settles, we rewrite the story. Victors become virtuous, survivors become heroes, power becomes proof of moral rightness. We don't ask whether goodness won. We assume it did, because the winner gets to define the meaning of good. This is the lie at the center of the fairy tale. Not that goodness is bad, but that goodness was never designed as a winning strategy. It was designed as a stabilizing one. Goodness makes people predictable. Predictability makes systems manageable. Manageable people are easier to govern. A society where everyone believes goodness is enough is a society where most people will not question power. They will endure unfairness quietly. They will excuse betrayal patiently. They will wait for justice that never comes. Not because they are weak, but because they are trusting. And trust, when weaponized, becomes obedience. This is why the moral fairy tale is so powerful. It doesn't need to be enforced. People enforce it on themselves. They internalize the belief that if they suffer, it must be meaningful, that if they lose, it must be righteous, that if they are exploited, it must be noble. But history does not reward nobility. It rewards those who understand how the world actually works. This does not mean goodness is useless. It means goodness is incomplete, like bringing a moral compass into a battlefield and expecting it to stop bullets. The fairy tale collapses not because goodness fails, but because it was never meant to compete with power. It was meant to coexist beneath it, to soften its edges, to humanize its consequences, to keep society from tearing itself apart, and perhaps, most importantly, to keep people believing the system is fair. Because a world that believes goodness wins will tolerate a great deal of injustice before it rebels. So when you feel that quiet anger, that sense of betrayal, that confusion when doing the right thing leads to punishment, you are not broken. You are waking up. And this is where the story changes. Because once you see the lie, you can no longer unsee it. And the question is no longer whether goodness wins. It is something far more unsettling. If goodness does not stop power, then what does? And that question is exactly why Machiavelli still haunts us. Perhaps goodness was never meant to win, only to keep things predictable. Machiavelli, the man who refused to lie. History remembers villains clearly. but it rarely forgives mirrors. In the early 1500s, Italy was not a nation. It was a chessboard soaked in blood. City-states rose and collapsed overnight. Alliances shifted with the weather. Foreign powers invaded, retreated, and returned again. Florence, Machiavelli's home, survived not through virtue, but through calculation. And it was here, in this unstable world of betrayals and quiet executions, that Niccolo Machiavelli committed his greatest crime. He described power exactly as it was, not as it should be, not as religion wished it to be, not as morality hoped it was, but as it functioned when survival was on the line. This is where the legend of the monster begins. Because Machiavelli did not write The Prince to glorify cruelty. He wrote it because he watched good men lose, repeatedly, to those who understood something they refused to accept, that morality collapses under pressure. When states are threatened, leaders do not consult ethics textbooks. They consult consequences. And Machiavelli noticed something deeply unsettling. The leaders who survived were not the most righteous. They were the most adaptable. They knew when to appear moral, and when morality would get them killed. This observation made Machiavelli dangerous, not because it promoted evil, but because it removed the illusion that goodness protects you. Society does not fear evil thinkers nearly as much as it fears honest ones, because honest observers expose patterns we depend on denying. Machiavelli did not invent manipulation, he documented it. He did not invent deception, he explained why it works. And in doing so, he shattered the comforting fantasy that power and virtue naturally align. This is why history needed him to be a villain. By branding Machiavelli as immoral, society could dismiss the mirror without confronting the reflection. Think about it. We rarely demonize tyrants for their actions. We demonize those who explain how tyrants succeed, because explanations are contagious. They spread awareness, and awareness threatens control. Machiavelli understood that leaders must sometimes act against mercy, against faith, against kindness, not because they are evil, but because the world punishes those who don't. This is not a celebration of cruelty. It is a diagnosis of reality. But diagnosis feels like endorsement to those who prefer denial. So Machiavelli became a scapegoat. His name turned into an insult. Machiavellian became synonymous with deceit, manipulation, heartlessness, as if manipulation began with him, as if deception didn't exist long before his pen touched paper. The truth is more uncomfortable. Machiavelli didn't teach rulers how to be ruthless. He explained why ruthlessness already ruled, and society hates those who reveal uncomfortable truths, especially when those truths implicate everyone. Because once you see the pattern, you can no longer pretend innocence. You begin to notice how leaders speak morality while acting strategically, how institutions preach fairness while rewarding compliance, how narratives are shaped not to reveal truth, but to maintain stability. Machiavelli saw this 500 years ago. He understood that morality is often a costume power wears, not its foundation. And instead of comforting the masses with illusions, he chose clarity. That choice cost him everything: exile, disgrace, historical vilification. But his ideas survived because they were accurate. Machiavelli forces us to confront a terrifying possibility, that the world is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed, and that goodness was never meant to defeat power, only to coexist beneath it. So when people say Machiavelli corrupted the world, they misunderstand his role. He didn't corrupt it, he revealed it. And the most dangerous thing you can ever do is tell the truth about how power actually works. Because once illusions die, so does obedience. And that is something history never forgives easily. Why moral people are predictable and power exploits predictability. There is a quiet comfort in believing that goodness is strength, that if you are consistent, fair, ethical, the world will eventually recognize it. But power does not reward comfort, it rewards leverage. And leverage feeds on something morality often creates without realizing it: predictability. Predictable people are safe. They follow rules even when rules fail them. They tell the truth even when silence would protect them. They act fairly even when fairness is not reciprocated. And because of this, they become readable. In behavioral psychology, predictability is not virtue, it is data. Once your reactions are known, your values mapped, your red lines identified, you are no longer a person, you are a pattern, and patterns are easy to manipulate. Machiavelli understood this long before neuroscience gave it language. He observed that rulers who acted with rigid morality were outmaneuvered, not because they were wrong, but because they were expected. Their enemies knew exactly what they would not do. They would not lie. They would not strike first. They would not betray, which meant their opponents could plan around them with confidence. Goodness, in this sense, became a strategic liability, not because goodness is evil, but because it assumes reciprocity in a world that runs on asymmetry. Modern psychology confirms this pattern. Humans exploit consistency. In negotiation theory, predictable negotiators lose. In corporate hierarchies, transparent employees are sidelined. In politics, principled figures are praised publicly and removed quietly. Why? Because systems are not designed to reward virtue, they are designed to reward outcomes. Ethical consistency makes people easy to steer. If you always choose fairness, someone will exploit your fairness. If you always choose honesty, someone will weaponize your transparency. If you always choose kindness, someone will drain it without consequence. This is not cynicism. It is structure. Good people often assume others share their rules. That assumption is their greatest vulnerability. They expect moral alignment where there is only incentive alignment. They expect restraint where there is only opportunity. They expect empathy where there is only strategy. And power notices this. In politics, moral figures become symbols, not decision makers. In corporations, ethical employees become brand assets, not leaders. In relationships, consistent givers become emotional infrastructure, not equals. They are useful until they are replaceable. Machiavelli warned that morality without adaptability invites exploitation, not because morality is wrong, but because it is structurally unprotected. Systems cannot safeguard what they do not prioritize, and systems prioritize stability, control, and effectiveness. This is why whistleblowers are celebrated in documentaries and destroyed in real time, why truth-tellers are admired in hindsight and punished in the present, why ethical consistency earns applause, but not protection. The world does not punish evil reliably, but it punishes weakness disguised as virtue immediately, because virtue without leverage is dependence, and dependence is exploitable. Power does not need to destroy good people. It only needs to predict them. Once predictable, they can be managed, delayed, redirected, sacrificed, and often they are thanked on the way out. This realization hurts because it attacks a foundational belief that being good is enough. But Machiavelli's world, and ours, operates on a harsher logic. Goodness was never meant to win. It was meant to stabilize, to calm, to create order beneath power, not above it. The uncomfortable truth is this: morality makes society function, but strategy determines who controls it. And until moral people understand how predictability turns into vulnerability, they will continue mistaking integrity for immunity. Power does not fear goodness. It anticipates it, and what can be anticipated can be used. The illusion of moral victory in history. History presents itself like a courtroom. Evidence is arranged neatly. Verdicts feel obvious. Heroes stand in the light. Villains fade into shadow. We are told the past is a moral lesson, that the good side won because it was good, that justice prevailed, that history somehow keeps score ethically. But this is not how history works. This is how history is edited. If you strip away the speeches, the monuments, the school textbooks, and the patriotic soundtracks, what remains is something colder. History is not a moral record. It is a results ledger. Machiavelli understood this with brutal clarity. He saw that morality is often assigned after power is secured, not before. That victory grants the authority to define virtue, and defeat condemns even the righteous to moral suspicion. The winners are remembered as necessary, the losers as reckless, immoral, or namava. Consider revolutions. Every revolution begins with moral language: freedom, justice, equality. But revolutions are not won by purity. They are won by organization, by strategy, by control of resources, narratives, and violence. Once power is seized, history changes tone. Actions that would have been called brutal become decisive. Manipulation becomes statesmanship. Suppression becomes stability. The same acts performed by the losing side are labeled crimes. This is not hypocrisy. It is mechanics. Machiavelli warned that people mistake outcomes for intentions. If you succeed, your intentions are assumed to be noble. If you fail, your intentions are interrogated, doubted, and rewritten. History does not ask, were they good? It asks, did they win? Wars follow the same pattern. Every war is framed as a moral necessity by those who prevail: defensive, inevitable, regrettable, but justified. The dead are honored. The strategy is sanitized. The cruelty is buried beneath language. But if the same war is lost, then it becomes aggression, madness, evil ambition. The moral narrative flips instantly, not because truth changed, but because power did. Machiavelli saw history not as a judge, but as a storyteller loyal to whoever holds the pen. This is why moral clarity in history feels so clean, because ambiguity is erased, complex motives are simplified, contradictions are removed, and uncomfortable tactics are reframed as sacrifices made for the greater good. History is not written by the good, it is written by the survivors, and survival often requires actions that morality alone cannot justify. This does not mean goodness never exists. It means goodness is not what determines remembrance. Those who lose with integrity are praised quietly, if at all. Those who win through force are celebrated loudly and taught as lessons. Even social movements follow this pattern. Movements that succeed are remembered as righteous. Movements that fail are remembered as dangerous, radical, or misguided. The same demands, the same grievances, the same moral arguments, different outcomes, different moral verdicts. Machiavelli rejected the fantasy that history rewards virtue. He observed that history rebrands power as virtue. And this is why moral people are often shocked by the past. They ask, how could they justify this? How could people support that? How could such cruelty be celebrated? Because victory grants moral authorship, and once a narrative hardens, questioning it feels like heresy. The illusion of moral victory comforts us. It tells us the world makes sense, that justice arrives eventually, that history bends toward goodness. But Machiavelli forces a darker question. What if history bends toward effectiveness? What if morality is not the engine, but the decoration added once the engine has already crushed everything in its path? This realization is disturbing because it removes a safety net. It suggests that being morally right does not guarantee being historically remembered as right, that goodness does not secure legacy. Power does. History does not reward goodness, it rebrands victory as goodness. And once you see that pattern, you can never unsee it, because suddenly history stops looking like a lesson and starts looking like a warning. The psychology of power: fear, desire, and control. Power does not begin in governments. It begins in the brain. Before laws, before armies, before ideology, there is biology. When pressure rises, morality is not consulted. It is overridden. Neuroscience tells us something uncomfortable. The human brain did not evolve to be ethical. It evolved to survive. Under threat, the rational mind steps aside. The amygdala, ancient, fast, unforgiving, takes control. Fear narrows perception. Desire distorts judgment. Status anxiety rewires priorities. and morality becomes negotiable. Machiavelli did not have MRI scanners or lab data, but he understood this truth intuitively. He observed that people speak of values in calm conditions and abandon them the moment stability fractures. Modern science confirms it. In high-stress environments, ethical reasoning declines, cognitive load increases, long-term principles are sacrificed for short-term safety. This is not corruption, it is adaptation. Fear is the most powerful political tool because it bypasses reflection. When people are afraid, they do not ask, "Is this right?" They ask, "Will this protect me?" History's darkest chapters did not begin with evil intentions. They began with perceived threats, economic collapse, foreign enemies, social instability, identity loss. Fear does not create cruelty, it permits it. Desire works just as efficiently. The desire for security, for belonging, for status. Social psychology shows that humans will abandon personal morality to maintain group acceptance. We conform not because we believe, but because exclusion feels like death to a social species. Tribalism simplifies the world. It divides reality into us and them, good and bad, safe and dangerous. Once divided, empathy becomes selective. Machiavelli recognized this when he wrote that people are fickle, not because they are weak, but because they are responsive to incentives and threats. Power understands this. Power does not demand belief, it engineers behavior. Status anxiety is another silent driver. Humans are obsessed with hierarchy: who is above, who is below, who is rising, who is falling. Neuroscience shows that perceived loss of status triggers the same brain regions as physical pain. People will compromise ethics not for survival, but to avoid humiliation, to remain relevant, to stay protected, to avoid becoming disposable. This is why moral courage is rare. It requires choosing isolation over acceptance, risk over safety, uncertainty over belonging. Systems quietly depend on the opposite. Morality functions best in stable environments, when rules are clear, when consequences are predictable, when survival is not in question. But power emerges in instability. Crises are its natural habitat. In chaos, moral frameworks blur, authority consolidates, control tightens. People do not ask for justice, they ask for relief. And whoever provides relief becomes legitimate. This is the hidden agreement between human psychology and power. Machiavelli did not accuse humans of being evil. He accused them of being conditional. Their values are strong until tested. Their principles are firm until threatened. Their ethics are sincere until costly. This does not make humanity corrupt. It makes morality limited. Human nature does not destroy moral ideals. It exposes where they stop working. And this is the truth most philosophies avoid, because it is easier to believe in universal goodness than to accept situational ethics. But Machiavelli refused comfort. He understood that systems are designed not around ideals, but around predictable human reactions. Fear creates obedience, desire creates compliance. Control emerges where both intersect. This is why power rarely announces itself. It embeds itself into instincts, into what feels safe, into what feels necessary, into what feels inevitable. And once morality clashes with survival, survival usually wins. The unsettling realization is this: the world is not ruled by evil people defeating good people. It is ruled by pressure revealing priorities. Machiavelli did not strip away morality to promote cruelty. He stripped away illusion to reveal structure, because only by understanding human nature, fearful, desiring, adaptive, can one understand why goodness alone was never meant to win. It was meant to guide. Power decides. Modern society, where goodness is performed, not protected. In the modern world, goodness has become loud. It announces itself, broadcasts itself, brands itself. Morality no longer hides in quiet sacrifice or difficult decisions. It stands under bright lights, framed by hashtags, mission statements, and public declarations. This is not accidental. Machiavelli warned that when appearances become more valuable than truth, power migrates from substance to performance, And today, morality is performed like theater. Social media rewards visibility, not virtue. Corporate ethics reward compliance, not courage. Public activism rewards alignment, not impact. Goodness has become something you show, not something you are protected for practicing. In this environment, moral behavior is less about justice and more about safety within the herd. Virtue signaling is not hypocrisy by default. It is adaptation. People learn quickly what language is rewarded, what opinions grant protection, what positions prevent exile. So morality becomes strategic. Say the right things, share the correct outrage, display the appropriate symbols. Not because everyone believes deeply, but because non-participation feels dangerous. Machiavelli would recognize this instantly. He understood that public morality often serves as camouflage, a way to appear aligned with power while avoiding risk. In modern institutions, ethics are often reduced to optics. Companies adopt moral language while quietly optimizing profit. Governments speak of values while calculating advantage. Individuals perform righteousness while avoiding personal cost. This does not mean goodness has disappeared. It means it has been outsourced to performance. True moral action is dangerous. It challenges. It threatens stability. Performative morality does the opposite. It reassures. It signals loyalty. It maintains order, and power prefers order. In Machiavelli's world, rulers learned to appear merciful, faithful, humane, whether or not they were. In our world, the script has evolved. Now, appearing moral is often more valuable than acting morally. Because appearances can be managed, consequences cannot. Social media amplifies this dynamic. Outrage becomes currency. Virtue becomes content. Moral certainty becomes entertainment. Complexity is punished. Nuance is suspicious. Silence is interpreted as guilt. So people perform, not to change systems, but to avoid becoming targets. This is why moral theater thrives in public spaces and collapses in private decisions. Why institutions adopt ethical language while resisting structural change. Why goodness is praised, but rarely defended when it threatens power. Machiavelli warned that societies obsessed with appearances become vulnerable to manipulation, because when goodness is measured by display, those who control display control morality. Algorithms decide visibility. Platforms decide acceptability. Institutions decide which values are safe to hold. Goodness becomes standardized, and anything outside the approved script feels dangerous. The irony is brutal. In a world saturated with moral language, actual moral courage becomes rare. Because real goodness risks reputation, real integrity invites retaliation, real ethics threaten comfort, so society learns to reward performance instead. It is safer to look good than to do good, safer to signal than to sacrifice, safer to echo than to challenge. This is not because people are evil, it is because systems punish deviation. Machiavelli's insight echoes louder than ever. When morality becomes a costume, power moves behind the stage. Today, goodness is not protected by institutions, it is consumed by them, displayed, monetized, applauded and discarded when inconvenient. This leaves the individual with an uncomfortable choice: to perform goodness and remain safe, or to practice it and accept the cost. Machiavelli would not tell you to abandon morality. He would tell you to understand its environment, because goodness that relies on applause will collapse the moment the crowd turns, and crowds always turn. The closing truth is unsettling, but necessary in modern society. Goodness is rarely rewarded for its impact. It is rewarded for its visibility. Today, goodness is not something you are shielded for. It is something you are expected to display. And once goodness becomes theater, power never sits in the audience. It writes the script. Strategic ethics, the space between naivety and cruelty. There is a lie told about Machiavelli that has survived for centuries, that he hated morality, that he glorified cruelty, that he believed the end always justifies the means. But this lie exists for a reason, because the truth is far more uncomfortable. Machiavelli did not argue against ethics. He argued against ethical blindness. He understood that morality, when detached from consequence, becomes dangerous, not noble. This is the philosophical core of his thinking. Not be evil to win, but do not confuse purity with responsibility. In moments of stability, moral ideals feel absolute. Honesty seems sacred. Mercy feels righteous. Fairness appears non-negotiable. But power does not operate in moments of comfort. It operates in crisis. And crises expose the limits of rigid goodness. Imagine a leader facing invasion, famine, or collapse. A corporate decision-maker choosing between survival and mass unemployment. A whistleblower weighing truth against catastrophic fallout. In these moments, morality stops being clean. Every option harms someone. Every delay costs lives. Every decision leaves blood on the floor, visible or not. Machiavelli asked a question most philosophers avoided. What is the ethical choice when all options are unethical? This is where strategic ethics live. In the space between naivety and cruelty, strategic ethics are not about abandoning values. They are about prioritizing outcomes over appearances. Because appearances comfort observers, outcomes shape reality. Machiavelli saw rulers destroyed not by malice, but by moral rigidity. They refused to act decisively because it looked wrong. They delayed necessary force because it felt unjust. They clung to ideals while their systems collapsed around them, and history punished them mercilessly, not because they were immoral, but because they were ineffective. This is the gray zone no one likes to talk about, where kindness can enable greater harm, where honesty can trigger chaos, where mercy can invite massacre. Strategic ethics accept this discomfort. They ask not, does this make me look good? But, what harm does this prevent? What future does this secure? What responsibility do I carry for consequences, intended or not? This is not nihilism, it is burden. Machiavelli believed leaders should carry moral weight, not escape it behind slogans. He despised performative virtue, the kind that protects self-image while outsourcing suffering. Strategic ethics demand ownership. If you choose force, you own the cost. If you choose deception, you accept the stain. If you choose restraint, you accept the fallout. No moral hiding. This is why Machiavelli remains disturbing, because he refuses to let ethics remain abstract. He drags them into reality, where people bleed, systems break, and decisions matter. The uncomfortable truth is this: moral purity often belongs to those insulated from consequence, those who do not decide, those who do not lead, those who do not bear responsibility for outcomes. It is easy to be good when you are not accountable for results. Strategic ethics reject that luxury. They demand effectiveness with conscience, not cruelty for gain, not goodness for applause, but responsibility for impact. This reframes the central question, not was the intention good, but what did this choice actually do? Machiavelli did not advocate becoming a monster. He warned that refusing to confront reality creates them. Because when leaders cling to appearances, power slips into the hands of those willing to act without restraint. Strategic ethics are a defense against that. They are an attempt to keep power accountable, not innocent. The hardest realization in this entire documentary is this: sometimes doing good requires actions that feel morally uncomfortable. Sometimes avoiding cruelty enables greater cruelty. Sometimes restraint is cowardice disguised as virtue. Is it better to be morally pure or responsibly effective? Machiavelli never answered this comfortably. Because there is no clean answer, there is only consequence. And those willing to face it, without illusion, are the only ones who truly understand power, not to worship it, but to survive it. If goodness doesn't win, what should we become? At the end of this journey, something feels unsettled, because the lesson was never that goodness is useless, or that morality is naïve, or that the world belongs only to the ruthless. The lesson is more disturbing than that. Goodness does not protect you, and it never promised to. We are raised to believe that being good is a shield, that sincerity repels harm, that fairness disarms power, that honesty creates safety. But history, psychology, and experience tell a quieter truth. Goodness is not armor, it is exposure. Machiavelli never asked people to abandon virtue. He asked them to abandon innocence. Innocence is the belief that intentions matter more than outcomes, that the world operates on fairness, that power plays by moral rules. Awareness begins where that belief ends. Awareness is not cruelty, it is clarity. It is understanding how people actually behave under pressure, how systems respond to incentives, how narratives are shaped, how fear, desire, and status quietly guide decisions. Awareness does not make you dangerous to others. It makes you less vulnerable. This is where Machiavelli is most misunderstood. He is not a blueprint for manipulation. He is a warning label on reality. He does not say, "Become ruthless." He says, "Recognize ruthlessness because it already exists, because manipulation does not disappear when you ignore it. Power does not soften when you moralize it. Exploitation does not retreat when you refuse to see it. It simply finds those least prepared." Awareness is survival because it removes surprise. When you understand how goodness is exploited, you can choose when to be open and when to be guarded. When you understand narrative control, you can protect your identity from being rewritten. When you understand emotional manipulation, you can respond instead of react. This is not about becoming cold, it is about becoming conscious. There is a difference. Coldness disconnects you from others. Awareness connects you to reality. Coldness destroys empathy. Awareness disciplines it. Coldness seeks domination, awareness seeks autonomy. Machiavelli's harsh reality is not an invitation to abandon values. It is an invitation to stop outsourcing your safety to them. Goodness without awareness is self-sacrifice. Awareness without goodness is predation. The balance is where survival lives. The world does not need more cruelty. It needs fewer people confused about how power works. Because confusion is expensive. It costs careers, reputations, relationships, lives. Those who remain innocent in a strategic world often become casualties, not because they were wrong, but because they were unprepared. Awareness does not guarantee victory, but it prevents exploitation disguised as morality. It allows you to choose when to be kind, when to be silent, when to resist, and when to walk away. This is the freedom Machiavelli quietly points toward. Not domination over others, but immunity from being controlled. And this is where the documentary must end, not with a call to arms, not with a manifesto, not with answers neatly packaged, but with a question that refuses to leave you alone. If the world does not reward goodness, if history does not protect the virtuous, if power does not play fair, then who do you become? Someone who remains innocent and hopes the world is kinder than it has ever been, or someone who stays good but sees clearly, because once you understand the game, you can no longer pretend it isn't real, and awareness, once gained, cannot be surrendered, only ignored. So the question lingers, quietly, uncomfortably: if goodness doesn't win, will you remain innocent, or will you become aware?